it's a real delight. I want to start with just gratitude. Also, David said everyone has to put this in, so I thought, why not? It's a good, this light works for everything. I want to start with gratitude. When I was sharing yesterday in the circle, so many times we talk about community and being together. We tend to mistake people as community. And that's true. People are a form of community, but there's so many subtler forms of community. And I just feel like this work has the support of a very deep and vast community. And we are just sort of the fruits of visible leaves. So I'm very committed to that community, and I'm very grateful to that community. Goenkaji at one point was doing a 10-day discourse. This is many years ago. And every morning he would wake up and he would do the chants, and then he would, do the instructions, and he would do all the different things all throughout the day, which is now recordings. And it so happened that in one of the courses, they were counting the number of participants, and it came up to grand total 0. And Goenkaji's like, great, starts chanting 4 a.m., does the instructions, does the whole thing for the whole 10 days. And they had volunteers, and volunteers are like, they're doing their thing, there's no physical bodies. And then at some point, somebody's like, Goenkaji, maybe you can rest today, And he's like, oh no. There's a lot more to it than meets the eye. It's not just the physical bodies that are trying to understand what Dharma is. And with that expansive mindset, if we can greet each moment with that kind of a mindset, everything changes. It's no longer just about music, is no longer just about the notes, but it's also the silence in between the notes. Community is no longer just the nodes and the people and the bodies, but the space in between. A circle is not just what's happening on the periphery, but what is filling the center. And that's the utmost important thing. And this is a very dynamic thing. This is not like a static resource. So either you become an instrument of this, it's a momentary thing. If you snap into, there's a great story of Prophet Muhammad. And Muhammad's in a meeting with some people, and he has an attendant with him, and they go to a meeting, and all of a sudden in the middle of the meeting, he's like, oh, time to go. And the attendant is asking him, he's like, what's going on? Like, you wanted to have this meeting and now it's gone? He's like, oh, the Farishta's left. Like, the meeting was never this one-on-one anyways. Much deeper. So how do we tap into that? What are the organizing principles when you look at life in that vastness? We talk about multiple forms of capital. When you really blow the lid off of that multiple, when that becomes infinite forms of capital, and the only tuning fork we have is our presence in the here and now, what emerges? And that's the question, that's the bell that is reminding us to wake up to that. That's what we're doing, and that's what I'm doing here. And I think that's the invitation for all of us to step into that. So those are all unplanned things, but emergence. See, this slide can cover everything, anything you want to say. It's good. Try to make some sense also. I think what I want to share, 2 things at a broad level, and one selfish interest. The microscopic and then the telescopic. You do have to be responsible. We can't just say it's just small. Right? Jesus Christ said, "Of whom much is given, much is expected." We're given a lot. Ultimately, everyone is given a lot when we shut off that lot. So if we open the floodgates, we get a lot. But we have to be good trustees, as Gandhi would say, of what is given to us. And so I think at some level, I want to talk about the microscopic but also the telescopic and our responsibility for the telescopic to the degree that we're aware. And my personal interest would be just to share a few stories, because I may not get a chance to see everybody one-on-one, and so I'll try to embed some stories. I want to start with one of those selfish stories. One of my heroes in life. What do I press? Well, this is up. You would think I know. Oh, that's a pointer. Okay. And that guy on the left is my brother, Viral, and I think most of you know Viral and Guri are sort of the two foundations on which I have always stood, so I have a lot of gratitude for them. Viral was diagnosed with this kind of an autoimmune disorder. Nobody really knew what caused it. And it looked like he was going to die 3 months ago. And, you know, that's a kind of a dramatic turn of events. And it was really shocking because he was in a meeting and he would just run out of breath, like even if he would climb up a flight of stairs. And when we go on a walk, and I would tease him, I'm like, look, man, you've gotten too fat, like, you know, like you need to work out. And I didn't know the extent to which he was feeling that. But Puppy noticed it, that he's like, you know, this is just a walk, why is he feeling like this? She forced him to go to get a checkup, and they called him, and like they just incessantly started calling him in the middle of the day. And they said that, you know, you gotta come now. Like, it doesn't matter what you're doing, like, you need to be admitted to emergency now. And it's amazing that he was able to hit like his body level, various physical functions were operating at such low levels. And yet, to us, he was just fine, you know, up until the day before. So we went through this episode, and now it looks like he's going to be fine. Like it's a 1, 2 in a million kind of a condition. 30 years ago, they would have had no recourse. Now they have some medicines. He ended up not taking any of them, but my mom would joke that, you know, you two brothers, you know, I can't get it. You can't do anything that's normal, but everything has to be 2 in a million, you know. And he started recovering. Again, they don't know why or how, which is why I was able to make this trip and honor the commitments of many people. But what was most remarkable, and the reason why I bring up his story, other than the fact that I just want to bring his presence into the circle, is that, you know, this kind of a thing, it was hard on me too, you know. I would have tough moments. Viral and I was like, look, if he dies at 96 or 36, it's not going to be easier if he dies at 96, you know, it's okay, like he's got to go. And I can say those kinds of things, and I would have moments where I remember one event where we were in a circle, or not a circle, and my dad does his music things, and my mom was like, oh, I wore a sari that Viral bought me from whatever, something. And I was like, Mom, you know, today, none of us are going to cry, okay? No, especially with my mom, I was saying, this is not about us, this is about other people, we just have to serve them, and we're not going to bring any of this up, you know? And I gave them a huge lecture on how they got to be tough and renunciate. And then my dad's like, oh, can you go and like speak it out? And I just start breaking down. And I was laughing and crying, you know, I was like, oh my God, like what's it? And that was just an ambiance there. But I shared there. And now, I suppose, is what I noticed, what was most amazing. So for me, it was immediate, you know, it was harder on my parents. You can imagine what a mom would go through, right? We have so many moms here. What was most amazing is that my parents were steady. Right? They held awakens, and they did all their stuff. And they understood that to love my daughter, I have to love another person. And if I do that, the gap in between fills with a kind of depth, which is eternal. And so what I saw in them is this, well, not this, yeah, sure, this, is this oak tree. This is what my dad told me to speak on that day with his music friends. He says, Nipun, you tell about these oak trees, right? And he says, you know, oak trees are resilient. All the homes go out if it's a hurricane, right? All the man-made stuff that doesn't have a foundation is swept up. But all these oak trees survive for thousands of years because they have deep roots. And those roots are connected to other roots. And that is what gives it the resilience. Sometimes this is actually true scientifically, 100 miles. They have this root ecosystem for 100 miles that's connected. So if I'm in trouble, I go to my roots, and if my roots are in trouble, they go to your roots. And if you need extra backup, you're like backup, 100 miles. And that, I think, is a great metaphor for this kind of work. We're not going to do it sitting on a cushion. If you talk to people, I know people who are super hardcore, right? When they sit a 30-day retreat, like they sit 23 hours in the day like this. They get up, go to the bathroom, eat, start again. And even then, when you talk to them deeply, you say, you're not going to do it because it's your will. That's only a very superficial resource. You would need to create this root ecosystem. This is what people like Vinoba and Gandhi were doing. So this idea that we are looking at the fruits, but we have to go way deeper to the branches and to the stem and to the roots and then to the interconnections of those roots. And with the insight of how that root system is cultivated, how that affinity is created, how am I going to connect with you? You're just not going to do it in a transactional way. It doesn't work like that. This is why Vivekananda wasn't a social entrepreneur. Right? That works at a certain layer, and I think that's helpful and valuable. But when you're aware of a much larger stack, you just wouldn't operate in that way. It doesn't make sense. So what is that? And I think that understanding of context over content. Content is there, but how do we deepen the context? So I'm like sharing these stories going in the flow, but can someone tell me what?
No, we all the time.
All the time?
Yeah. No, really, we had scheduled till 12 actually. Yeah.
Okay. So I can modulate, I can go fast. There's some concepts that I also want to share, just so we can be responsible of what is given to us. So at that level of head, I'll share a couple of things. And I'll gloss over this, but this is Jayesh Bhai coming. This is Audrey and Jayesh Bhai. Actually, there's a street called Sincerity Way and Compassion Avenue. That's Kumar Uncle, who I would say is my connection to Swami Vivekananda in a very subtle way. Very old man, and Jayesh Bhai just kind of sees his wife and never met before, hugs him, and she's like, "How did you know I needed love?" And she just starts crying, you know. And it was, and then this was, you know, me and Jayesh Bhai bothering Mukesh and tickling him with that. But the idea being that you know, if people say, "Well, what did Jayesh Bhai do on his trip?" You know, and that since Guri and I were with him all the time, you realize that it's the stuff in between the gaps that allows the fruits. The fruits are important. You know, it's not that they're not important; they're very significant. Tell a hungry person the fruit's not important; they'll tell you, "I want the fruit." You know, I don't care what he does the rest of the time. But if you want to look deeper into it, I think you get to see that it's not a switch, it's like a constantly on process. And I think so many of us do that in our own ways. Maybe we do it 80% of the time, or 60, or even 10. But I think we all understand that it's not about how you're doing, what you're doing when you're on stage, or when you're doing some work of impact. But it's how you are when the lights are not on. This was a really sweet moment. I spoke to all these people with special needs and special abilities. These guys came over, and it was the cutest thing. 3 of them are blind, and 1 has cerebral palsy, and 1 is autistic. This girl to the left, Priyanka, comes up to me after this talk last week in Bangalore, and she says, initially I didn't realize she was blind. There were like 1,200 people, and a lot of them were special needs, but a lot of them were not. And I didn't know she was talking to me, and initially, blind people have they touch and they feel it, and I figured it out. And she says, I feel like I have received so much in life. It is time I give back. I don't know how to give back. Will you help me? I was so moved, and not just by what she said, but also the vibration with she was sharing. And in some sense, we're all disabled, right? Some part of our hearts are kind of broken, and we're all asking that same question. I want to help. I don't know how. Will you help me? That's what I'm asking. That's what I've been asking for the last 20 years. It's really powerful. Each one of these guys has that kind of story. I can tell you at least a dozen stories of how I was moved by people who sometimes will ask me, well, what are you learning? Because I ask them that question all the time. And it's like, what are you learning? Are you just going through life, or are you growing through life? It's, what are you learning? And they'll be like, Bruno, what are you learning? And in one of those circles, I said, what I'm learning is that the human heart unfailingly responds to the advances of love. Unfailingly. I was in Hyderabad a couple of days back. A couple hundred intellectuals. Intellectuals, it's heavy. One of them was launched into this question. And I shared this story of Mother Teresa. I don't know if you know this story. I think Nita and Sarah will probably remember this. One of my friends was with Mother Teresa. She told me this story. And she says, some rich people had come to visit Mother Teresa. And they said, we want a photo. And with Mother Teresa, they brought a photographer. They were giving a lot of money to her work. And so they came, they took a photo, and they're like right next to her. And someone says, no, Mother Teresa, not there. Can you just this way, like move here. A little to the left, a little to the right. And my friend who was watching this, she's a big devotee of Mother Teresa. Not a devotee, but someone who loves Mother Teresa. She's like, you can't just tell Mother, just take the photo, move on, like, okay, you've given some money, what's the big deal? And then they're like, they don't understand, and she's just getting frustrated on the side, she's over there. And then these guys are like taking photos, and then they're like, no, Mother Teresa, tilt your head a little this way, And then Mother Teresa tilts it that way. And then they come up and they're like, no, like this, like that. And my friend over there is furious. Right? It's like, who do you think you are, coming to Mother Teresa, twisting her head around so you can have some stupid photo that you can hang up on a wall? Really angry. But it was not her place to say, because Mother Teresa was like, okay, want this way? Okay. And after they left, goes up to Mother Teresa and says, Mother Teresa, how could you tolerate such inhumane behavior? She says to Mother Teresa in one sentence, she says, my dear, there are many kinds of poverty. For her, that child that is left at her doorstep, that is crippled, she treats them with the same kind of compassion with this person that wants to twist their head all around. There are many forms of capital, there are many forms of poverty. It's okay. We just get used in that flow. So this idea has really taken deep root, that we unfailingly respond to the advances of love. And there's many of these stories. I'll skip that. I'll share this because, this is in the last week. There might have been like maybe a dozen of these press stories. through all the different cities. But this is like, first of all, I hate doing it, but I would only do it if someone is hosting and it supports them, and so I say, okay. But when I engage with these people, someone comes to do a story, inevitably, Nisha was there with me with a couple of them, and she was saying, they're writing some small story. And this story, this empty space circle story, is a vast story. There is no way words can capture it. So I said, okay, well, you want me for those words? I'm going to give you this, And so I remember in Bangalore, this happened in Chennai too. I was in Bangalore, and they put me in a room. They were really good guys, and so the people who were organizing, they said, we have a press conference. I said, okay, fine. I'll just take it as that their volunteers are coming in. All right, I'm going to make, I really didn't want to do it because, but I said, fine. So first up, right, these guys come. This girl, the 3 of them. And by the end, they've stopped taking notes, and she's like, this is the happiest I've felt in my whole life. And I said, they were young. I said, and one of the younger guys comes up to me and he says, I want to bring this to Bangalore. What should I do? This is what the world needs. And I said, look, if it's either now or it's never. You either start now or it never happens. That's always the choice. So he was like this amazing sketch artist, and so he decides to take a piece of paper and he starts drawing. And he gives it to me. I don't know if I have it. This is another person. And he's like, dear Nipun, thanks for giving me the gift of now. And that was his act of kindness. He decided to do it right to me. And since then, he started doing acts of kindness. But this relationship, it's not about this, right? It's about taking each moment and going much, much deeper into it. And that's happened. I can tell you story after story. By the third one, I was getting so gutsy. I was like, we were all in the flow in this room, and it was it was awesome. And by the third one, I was like, why you went beat around the bush? I was like, okay, you could do a story on me, or we could start a revolution of love. Straight to these guys. And there were 2, and I felt that in their vibration. And we didn't do a story at all. And they want to do a retreat of positive news here next year now. It's like a 2-hour conversation. I said, look, you want to talk about a movement of love? Well, let's go, And it was just like that possibility. So at some level, there's fruits, like there's stuff you notice, but that's not the real stuff. Right? The real stuff is the context. Real stuff is how you practice in between. And that's what draws all kinds of other community, the real community. I'll tell you one last story before I get to some concepts. This was in London. Satish Kumar came. Satish Kumar's story, as you know, we're all pilgrims, right? We all go out. Nemo has done 100 concerts in remarkable ways. Pratyusha's just done the Namadabhya Parikrama. Joseph, she's probably on an eternal Parikrama. We all do this stuff. Satish Kumar did something remarkable. He walked from Gandhi's grave to Kennedy's grave, from India to US. He goes to Vinoba, and Vinoba says, I'll give you 2 weapons. One is you're a vegetarian, stay a vegetarian. Second is don't take any money. So he does this whole thing. He becomes kind of famous because all these big governments receive him, and there's a context. He comes back, and Vinoba tells him one story of Karthik and Ganesh. Because they had a race, Karthik went all around the world, and Ganesh just did this one parikrama around the parents that he won. And then Vinoba goes back to his weeping, And in a way, we're doing all this, whatever it is that we're weaving, because we need to. That's our karmic sort of patterns. Ultimately, there's so many short ways around it as well. Not short. There's no short. Sometimes you take the long scenic route because we need to. Sometimes you take the short route. So to hold it all with a gentle sort of ease, it's okay to take the long route, to walk from India to America, to take a short route, to whatever, to take this kind of a route or that kind of a route. I think it's more focus is like what is happening to you through that process is the most important thing. So, as you know, we talk about, this is a traditional model, right? For from impact to projects to people to some inner transformation. We do it this way, and we've talked about this. But I want to take it a little bit deeper today. And like, what is inner transformation? So if you ask most people, they will say, well, you must be the change you wish to see in the world. Makes sense, you're being changed, you have inner transformation. The people, well, that's all about community. So many people will say we should lead with community, and we should create that kind of a change. It makes sense. Projects, well, you can do projects, but let's serve. Makes some amount of sense. And impact. Like, there's so much suffering in the world, we should create impact. These are all reasonable things that people say. But here, we're asking a slightly deeper, our inquiry is slightly deeper. It's not just be the change, because Hitler was being the change he wishes to see in the world. He was. His hands, head, and heart was aligned. It's very clear, like, why I'm doing this. My hands are doing the killing, and my heart is saying go. So how do we make sure, what's the distinction between Ravan and Ram, right? And what's the nuance there? So being the change is something that evolves only with constant practice. You can't just do it in this one way, shape, or form. And if we do this constant practice, then it starts to, you arrive at, if you go from Ravan to Ram, is my hypothesis. I haven't gotten to either one of those places. Community is not just people. At a shopping mall, you have people. But a lot deeper, what we talk about here are deep ties. I don't know, who was I talking to? Niti, maybe? Yesterday? Or Smita, I forgot, one of you guys. And we were saying how we feel like we know each other, although we've just met. I feel like I'm connected to you. So many times they were saying how you feel connected to some people in this kind of a space. So it's not just community, it's not just ties. Right? It's not just like, oh, I hugged you in person and I feel great about that hug and I feel secure. That's a start. But we're talking about deep ties. A community of very deep ties. Certainly I can say I have a deep tie, hopefully a noble tie, with my brother. That kind of a deep tie. And it's not just service, but it's an offering. There's that quote that we often use, when you help, you see life as weak. When you fix, you see life as broken. When you serve, you see life as whole. So there's a lot of people in the world who kind of stop there. Let's be cool, let's be equal. I'm the same as you, and we will co-create, and that's beautiful. There's a whole sort of liberal left-wing movement around that. But this is much deeper. This is saying that I'm going to give to you, and I'm indebted to you. Actually, thank you for the opportunity. This is what people like Swami Vivekananda taught us. In a very deep way, he said, who are you to help anyways, right? Nature does the helping, but you get a chance to be of service. So it's not just helping and serving, but it's this offering born of gratitude. That's totally different. And it's not just changing the world in measurable ways. It's changing the world with these distributed ripples. That's what you're doing when you go on a bobby yatra. How many of these ripples have you seen? Like that with all of us, even if you're just a mom. How many ripples have you seen, right? And that's just, it's a distributed thing. It doesn't need to be contained. I mean, as a mom, you kind of have a son, right? So that's contained. But even that, like, if we just start to distribute that, what does that look like? So this whole thing, I think, is our context. Right? This is the context in which we are working. It's not just community, it's not just being the change. It's not just service, and it's not changing the world and alleviating suffering. We're talking about a very different way of being, certainly for me. And what does this look like? Well, that thing on the right is just a little, one of our friends did that. She was an entrepreneur. I say was because now she's like, point to no return. Audrey knows. She's from Singapore, really sweet person, man. So what does this look like in terms of institutional practice? And that's where these three things come in. Right? Be volunteer run. Sachi mentioned three things yesterday. The they're sort of there, but not entirely. One is being volunteer run. Second is to not ask for anything. Right? To not fundraise is a way that people understand that, but really to not seek, to work with what we have. The third thing is to focus on small. And so this is sort of the context with which if you are doing these three things, then it's a service-based project. Doesn't matter what you call it. Whether it's a Move by Love project. It's a love project. Forget, But to me, this has become the sort of definition. And each one of these things has a reason. So, volunteer run unleashes the power of many. Did you guys know that we spend 3 billion hours every week just playing video games? 3 billion hours. There are people, and why do we play? Why do we do these things? Because there's a hole in our heart, and we think this is going to fulfill it. I mean, if these 3 billion people who are disabled in their own ways, we all are. I am too. I used to play. I don't know. I think when I was young, I used to play. I'm sure I did, but how can we give the different opportunities to fill that gap? And I think that, to me, is a very powerful thing. So this idea of being volunteer run is we know about this. In a note of 50 people, how many things are possible? And a lot of people, if you'll notice, this happens in some of the retreats also. Some people will come to network and connect and all that. So in a note of, I think most of you have probably seen this, in a note of 50 people, if you do one-to-many, you have 50 connections. If you do one-to-one, Vinova style, you have 1,225 connections. If you do many-to-many, which is what we're talking about, this is like science, right? This is an exact number. Reed's law, 100 million trillion. Right here in this room, we have roughly about 50. Assume we have a few more. We'll count our devas in the mix. 100 million trillion. How in the world you can network frantically? I want to connect with everybody. I want to get ahead. I want to see what I can do. And this guy's got some resources. This guy's spiritual. This guy gives me love. And you can do all that, but you're just not going to arrive there. It just doesn't work, right? So Vinoba and sages like him knew about this, and they said, "How do we get there?" He said, "You have to download the app. It's in your human heart. You already got it. You're born with it. You just need to unlock it." So these small acts of kindness, they sound like such a simple thing, but it actually activates that app. Once that app is activated in the internet, you're totally plugged in. You have this 100 million trillion possibility in a room of 50 people. That's just not feasible otherwise. So this is actually way more powerful. It's not that, you're doing spiritual stuff, kindness stuff, you do that. Actually, if you look at the sages, they're like, oh man, you're just doing one-to-one or one-to-many. Oh man, that's not quite, It's the real stuff. It's like 100 million trillion, and that's just 50. Imagine you get billions and billions of beings all over the world. Man, it's uncountable, it's unfathomable, it's infinite. And all you have to do to tap into that, to become an instrument, is to meet each moment with selflessness. You do it with an agenda, can't get there. In fact, you block it. You're like, instead of 100 million trillion, I can only handle 1 trillion. Okay, put more blocks, get more selfishness, have more agendas. Fantastic. You'll get to 1,225. Great. Be super egotistical. You'll have 50. I mean, it's cheap, right? Well, who would want to do that? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. And so that's what we're talking about. That's what we're doing. The second thing of not fundraising, it's really not asking, right? This guy, Brother David, one remarkable, I would say, of all the sages and saints I've met, he's certainly one of the gems. Catholic, but just a unique human being. His practice, he doesn't ask for anything. Anything as in, he won't even take a glass of water. So when Gurya and I were with him, he's like, so Brother David, how's that working out for you? Not asking for a glass of water. He's like 88 now, right? He's lived his whole life like that. Like not compromising, not like, this is practical. How is this person going to know I'm thirsty? And he wouldn't do it. He had somebody else, like if somebody pours in water, he gets water. Even in his own monastery, they all have that kind of protocol. And he says, you know what happens is that if I need soup and I want soup, and the soup is right there in the middle of the table, no one is giving it to me, I start saying, well, who is giving it to Jayashvai? Oh, nobody, maybe I can give it to Jayashvai. And Jayashvai starts saying, who's giving it to me? And he starts thinking, and you start being other-centered. And he says, Saint Benedict saw this hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and he established this. So he says that there's a book. I was very curious about his practice, so I would bug him with all these questions. And he says, Saint Benedict wrote a book, and it says, ask nothing, and he said another level, do nothing, and refuse nothing. So he wrote me this, one of his favorite quotes. He wrote me a really sweet note as we were leaving. We would be in a meeting, we were talking about compassion with these people. And like I'm talking about many to many, he's not like that kind of a guy, but he gets it. Like he goes to the 100 million trillion thing, right? Like even when we're talking, like before I even say it, he's just like agreeing with me. Like it was so great because I had back up to everything I was saying. He didn't even understand. He was just like, here we go. And so at the end, he wrote me this really sweet note, and he says, whatever happens, whatever what is what I want. Nothing else but this. This complete surrender to the present moment. And such people exist. This is not like stuff of legends, right? This is not mythology. There are people who are there. I mean, if our karma ripens, I would love to bring him here. I mean, he's old, but he's untiring. I don't know. He works on some different kind of fuel. But the idea is this, that when you ask nothing, what happens? What you do is when that person gives you water, when Guru gave Brother David water, you create these very deep ties. They're gift ties. And if you have a network of these gift ties, Jayashvai kind of has that, right? Like he has created so many of these ties that even today, when an Arvin comes, I guess I can share, today is their wedding anniversary. And so in the evening, we're going to ask for, I think, one volunteer to swap out so they can be, they both agreed to sort of spend the day here, and that's awesome, but also to do a little Q&A with them. And this morning, the part of the reason why we were a bit late was because he invited these two sweepers in, and we were like, it was just this whole thing, and he's like constantly cultivating these very deep ties, and I think what you are afforded that if in your heart you're not seeking anything. And so when you have that network of these gift ties, doesn't even matter what continent you go, stuff just kind of randomly happens. And you have all these service opportunities, so you start looking at every single thing, and you say, well, what are the service opportunities? I'm asking for nothing, so you're not thinking about, well, how can I secure my water? You're saying, who doesn't have water? How can I help? Once you start holding this idea of a gift heart. And once you have these service opportunities, you have this inner transformation which makes you super strong. Which then tells you, look, even in this case, I need to secure something, but I'm much stronger. And I don't need to ask. So this becomes a virtuous cycle. Like the more you ask nothing, the stronger you become. And the stronger you become, the more you serve. I mean, I could tell you a little bit more about this, but just in the interest of time, I just glossed over it. But I think there's a whole cycle that these monks are working on. It's an ancient cycle. It's an eternal cycle. It's the cycle of nature. That Saint Benedict, in 1400s is saying, ask nothing, refuse nothing. Why would he do that? And why is it still relevant? If he would have said this is the innovation of our time, and this is how it will evolve, it would have been different. But he didn't. And so I think this is something that's very true, and I think we're exploring that in this kind of a space. We know about, of course, talked about this, and I think Siddhartha said, I shared this, Jayashvai shared this. He would tell people who were his very pakka, sort of pure-hearted people, he would say, take a broom, take a scripture of your choice, and take a musical instrument. That's your security. Go to a village. That's it. That's all you got. I was in Chennai recently. To 300 of these people, and I give this talk. It was really well received, but there's one guy, first question, he goes up and he's like, yeah, I think this is all wrong. I'm like, okay. And he just launches into me. Like, this is, there's like fancy people here and all, and he just like takes over the mic and he just like really launches into me. And I was like, okay, do I have a chance for a rebuttal in between? And he's like, as soon as I'm done, not yet. Okay. So I was laughing. I mean, it didn't matter to me. And so then once he finishes, then I was like, all right, now my turn. And at the end, he's like, I am convinced I stand corrected. And before we left in the day, he actually comes down and touches my feet. And what I told him, he's asking me about terrorists and all this stuff, right? Like, I mean, we can talk about that. But what I told him was one of these guys. I told him Shubarau's story. How does Shubarau go into a community and come out by getting all these people who are killed, like in many cases 30 folks, and say, hey, yeah, actually here's my gun, give me my sentence, I'm volunteering to go to jail, and in return I want a scripture of my choice. 550 people did that with this one guy who had nothing. He's alive, we know him. Many of you might have seen him, and you're like, wait a second, how can he do that? What's his technology? What's his scheme? And you ask him that, and he says, look, I just went to make friendship, and I lived with them for a year. And this is what happened. This is how you can turn people. But when you can't do that, then you work with cheap resources, like violence. It's a very, or like anger, or like activism. It's a cheap resource. Shubarau has done so much more than any activist would ever do, than any army would ever do. And he has done it purely with the power of love. I don't need to tell you all these stories, but these are like amazing stories. I was with Nirmala Didi one day, and she tells me in one sentence, like completely sets herself apart from the rest of it. She's like, yeah, I don't think I've ever bought anything in my life. In my life. How can you get away with not buying anything? You can ask Brother David the same question. How can you get away with not asking for anything? These are not mythical stories. These are real people. How can they do that? That's a good question to hold and ask. Same with Dwakoji. Incredible human being. He doesn't have that particular practice. But same in the US, when he came, he was visiting our place, and all these people wanted to give him money. And he says, oh, thank you for the offering. He says, yeah, just fill out this form. He said, oh, sorry, I can't do that. My teacher told me not to do it. Why would he not fill out a form? The guy wants to give it. He wouldn't do it. Because he says, then I'm going to be off of nature's cycle. That's what my teacher, taught people. I said, yeah, I had been. So these are interesting things. We can talk a lot more about each of these things. But I think the question, I also don't know that technology, but I'm very fascinated by it, and I have a very strong hunch that there's something very deep there that I want to look at, I want to understand, I want to experience, and I want to live into that. And these people come into our lives. How many people can even say that you know all three such people? Right? So many of us in this room, I think, at least know one of these people. In person. And why are we afforded that responsibility? What are we going to do with that lineage? What are we going to do with that responsibility that is afforded to us? I mean, this is the real privilege, that we have access to this kind of thinking and this thought. Okay, last thing, I'll be quick now, sorry. You guys are tuned in, so I'm going with it, but I shouldn't do that.
Don't stop.
We have time.
Madhu's saying we still have time?
No, yes, we have.
You have the whole day.
No, but
I like Maitri Milans. In retreats, it's never like this.
No, practically we do.
And small, I think this is something we all kind of do. I want to give you Nemo's example here. Because, this guy is, and it's very hard for people in my position to say, appreciate anybody. Because when you do, like on our Awaken Circle, if we ever say, oh, thank you, Bhumika, for the flowers, right? The next week we will have like dozens and dozens of flowers. So we can never thank anybody. There's still a lot to learn from a lot of people. What inspires me most about Nemo, because I've seen him up close, he He did 100 concerts in the span of 5 months. And that's great. Right? That's really great. But what inspires me is that he would sing in the same way with like 5 people. And of course, you have to skillfully figure out what the right setting is, as he would in front of 500 people. Or I don't know, you might have done 5,000. I mean, you never know. Gee. But that idea of, it's not about that external size. Like, Move by Love, maybe, certainly Space, it's now getting the attention of a lot of people. But in your heart, like, what is it? Do you show up the same way with that one person at 2 a.m. with jet lag, when you're hungry, when you're thirsty, when you're not feeling down? Are you still thinking the other person? Are you still thinking love in the same way that you would when you're up on some stage? And if you are, then the rest of this stuff is just going up and down, and you're not of it. And you can only do that, right? Some TFI folks had come. Some folks had come. And they were asking, they said, how do you think we should fix education? And I said that, look, if your organizing principle is that the world is broken, and you will fix it, because Purvi, you have some amazing gifts. And it's going to feel good at that moment, right? You're like, wow, I stand for something. I have meaning. There is hope. And all these other people don't. But what will happen after a year? She's going to run out of that fuel, and I'm going to have to retell her, look, there's more problems in the world, and you are more amazing. It's like this drug. It never ends. But instead, if you say, look, the small acts of kindness, planting seeds, nothing more, then your cycle is internal. Right? Then your whole, it's regenerative. It's like, I'm doing small acts, I'm feeling great about it. I'm doing small acts, like the engine, the feedback loop is not outside, it's all inside. And that's the only way you could do 100 concerts in 5 months and still decide to, show up for these retreats and all this kind of stuff that Nipun does. That's just not possible otherwise. You would burn out. Right? You can't sustain it. It's just impossible. And that's Nemo, right? And if you ask Nemo, he would say, well, I'm just learning. And he is. We're all learning. Because you look at people like Vinoba, he's like non-stop, man. The guy's just like a machine. And you're like, why? How does he do it? It's very easy. He's just not vested on the outside. It's all an inner engine. And the capacity of that inner regenerative loop is vast. It's amazing. And so we have to wean off of the outside and go much more on the inside. And we're all doing it. When Mira goes on a cycle yatra, we kind of see the power of that. When Josera is doing the Awakening Burgos, right, we see the power of that. And when I get weak, I get strength from that power, but I have to seek the right kind of power, which is the inspiration to go within. Right? Not security because I know these bodies. That, we have this Maitri Milan, and that's inspiring. That is going to run dry. If you come every year for Maitri Milan, that's going to run. I hope you do. I mean, I hope I get to see you, certainly. But even if we don't, your engine has to be rooted, your strength, your anchoring has to be rooted in a much deeper place within. And that's the power. So at some level, right, this is what these guys were all doing, but at some level, we have, these simple principles, but they're not simple at all. It's what creates the context. It's the gateway to incredible depth. So the world will look at it, now the world kind of looks at it with, it's like, something's going on. Right? But if you were to do this in a small scale, if I just do a Labor of Love project, people would say, that's childish, that's cute. One of our volunteers made this incredible film, but he didn't want to get everyone in his film, this is Silas, he didn't want everyone in the film, like usually, HBO was after him. This film would have gotten major awards. But that film was, for HBO to sign, they make you sign waivers with, you have to have, like if you're in my film, I have to get a waiver from you, it says you don't want any part of the film. And then I will sell it to HBO, and HBO will make it get an Oscar, right, if it's good. And this film was amazing, and it was great. So Silas, they told him, you need to have these stack of disclaimers. He's going out, he's at this Native American reservation, and he says, he calls me up there. He's like, I have this stack of these waivers, but something in my heart doesn't feel right. this is not why I did it. He decides not to throw away the waiver. But what is the waiver saying? That, look, if I profit from it, you don't get anything. And that's what HBO wants. And they're saying, for that, in return, I'll give you distribution, and you'll feel great, and all these messages will go out. Silas said, he threw it in the trash can. He said, I'm going to take this from Indian reservation to Indian reservation, meet my car. First one he played at, there was a person in the film, that guy, that young kid who was in the army, he died, and at the funeral his mom says, I want to play Dakota 38. And Silas says, that to me is more powerful than an Oscar. As a filmmaker, that's the thing you want. As a filmmaker, you've created this, you want that reach, and these guys have that capacity, but Silas says no. So that context, so each of these things, what are we saying yes to when we make such decisions? This is the question to hold on to. To me, I'm committed to these values because it gives me access to that depth. And I think many of us are. So last thing I want to share, concepts, is this idea. This is a provocative question. Can we create social change without money? It's a great question because it just takes the rug out from the traditional thing. It's like, oh, can you give if you don't have anything? A lot of people on our pilgrimage would sometimes insult us and say, first you should be something and then you can give. You come as like with nothing, and we have many of those moments. But if you think about it, first we must have, then we can give. Makes some amount of sense. It's true. Otherwise, what would I give? But does that mean I was born with nothing? I was born bankrupt, then I started to acquire material things, and then I'm going to give that. That's not entirely true. So what is it that we're born with? What is that value that's beyond money? And this becomes a very interesting question. It's not anti-money. It's just the metaphor we use is to see money as a fertilizer. It's one of many things that goes into the ground. It's fruits. It's not money. You measure it by money, it's not going to work. So in society, we have a private sector, we have a public sector, and we have a voluntary sector. Voluntary in India, we oftentimes think of it as NGOs are part of the voluntary sector. I'm saying pure labor of love, like no transactions. Right? Things that say, hey, that's, some old person wants this seat, I'm going to give them that seat. That's part of the voluntary sector. So typically we have these three sectors. And on the right side, if my animations work, the private is extrinsic motivations. Money, power, fame, those kinds of things. It's very good at managing extrinsic motivations. The voluntary sector is really good at intrinsic motivation. Compassion, knowledge, purpose, fun, all those kinds of intrinsic motivation. And what the public sector is supposed to do is to say that, look, for a healthy society, you need to balance all of these out. Some things are good, like extrinsic motivations is good for some things. But for so many things, for a healthy society, you need a healthy voluntary sector. So public sector is supposed to balance these out. But in practice, what actually ends up happening, if you look at all the numbers, is that the private sector is like this hungry ghost that's eating up the public sector. Everyone in public sector will tell you, no matter which country you go to, that it's controlled. One more. I don't know why it's getting automatic, sorry. It's controlled, so the private sector's taken over the public, and now it's taking over the voluntary sector. Right? You have this $500 billion industry. Sorry. You have this $500 industry called the sharing economy. And this is what it does. It puts a price tag on everything. These are all actually really true. Like, you can sell your dog, rent your dog for $5 a month. And we give awards to people who write apps that create this possibility. And those kids who are just coming out of college and they're saying, I want to do something innovative, and they're saying, this is a problem. And they convince you with this idea that in the US, for example, there's 30 million power drills that are made. Like, to fix things in the house. Average power drill is used for 8 minutes. So very smart people will come together and they will say, that's a waste. not good for the environment. They'll make a social cause out of it. And it's true, it's just in that context, it makes a lot of sense. Why do you have 30 million drills that are only used for 8 minutes? We should share. If you have a lawnmower, in the US everyone shares lawnmower, you use your lawnmower 1 hour a week. Everyone doesn't need to have a lawnmower. We should reduce our footprint in the world. It makes sense. Except that when you start to put price tags on everything, and when you facilitate that connection, where it used to be, oh, you want salt, I'll give you salt. You want sugar, I'll give you sugar. And now it's no longer that kind of a sharing. It's a sharing with a price tag. And as soon as you do that, the bigger thing is you lose what Vinoba and Brother David and Dwarkoji were all talking about. You cut off that whole thing. So at some level you can say you have increased productivity, but you're losing the whole depth of the possibility of that deeper interaction. So we have to rekindle that. Right? And so when you say, can you do it without a price tag, this is the possibility that we're living into. And what is it? What is that deeper resource, and how do you go deep into that context to birth entirely different set of solution sets? Empty Hands doesn't have a price tag on it. Works in Conversations, or Art Magazine, doesn't have a price tag. None of the stuff we do has a price tag on it. When Federal Express came and they said, we'll ship all your smile cards all over the world for free, we said, oh really, that's great. And he said, yeah, just put our logo, you know. Then all of a sudden, it doesn't work. Right? I love FedEx, fine FedEx. I'm not endorsing FedEx, but they're great. Like the person that I'm interacting with is great. It just doesn't make any sense. If you throw away that whole deep, vast world of inner transformation and the resources and nature's cycle, it just doesn't make. Why would I throw that away so I can get some short-term sort of a fix? So this is the thing, is that the world has lost faith in this kind of a thing. It's a very provocative thing to say, well, can you create money? And they're like, well, you know, stuff in the world takes money. Right? It does. It's not to say you're anti that. But how do you go to infinite forms of capital where you can just tap in? And if you really look at people who have created significant, sustainable social change, they always, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Dalai Lama, Cesar Chavez, you know, all these people that we can list off, they operated with this deeper idea. So this is the last thing I wanted to say. I'll tell you one other thing. Some of you might have seen this. They did this experiment. They've done 40 years of experiments on this. It's fascinating. It's actually mind-blowing. So they got a bunch of people, they said, for example, I love to solve puzzles. And they put them in a room, and they said, great, you guys really love to solve puzzles. Now I'm going to pay you for that. And they said, okay, fantastic. I love to do what I do, and now I get paid, which is great, you know, because then I can take care of my parents, and it makes good sense. And then they said, one fine day, now you're not going to get paid. And the most amazing thing happened. They stopped loving the puzzle making, puzzle solving. Stuff they used to do before, for the love of it, then money came in, and then you took money out, so you would think you would return back to original state. Nope, you don't do that. So, and this is not like one or two cherry picking, this is like established science. So, money does desensitize us, and the good news for us is that we are just born to give. They did this experiment with 18 months old. There's an amazing video on this, like a 5-minute video, the whole series of experiments. There's a bookshelf and a book drops, and an 18-month-old wants to go help. If the 18-month-old sees that I'm trying to pick up the book and I can't do it, wants to help. A clothespin drops, like here. This is an actual photo from here. I drop a clothespin while hanging my clothes, and I can't get to it. An 18-month-old. There's videos of this stuff. So we're wired, like we don't need to motivate. There's no marketing needed. We all know this. But we don't have any systems that are rooted with this fundamental idea. It would be so much easier if we operated with this idea that everyone wants to give. I don't need to show you, I should have Amitabh Bachchan, right, to motivate you. I don't even need to tell you the world's a terrible place and you are amazing to motivate you. So how do you operate with that function in mind? So, oh, you might have to do some magic here too. So if you look at society, right, extrinsic motivations, on the left, we have a ton, millions and millions of businesses. In between, you have things like that are intrinsic, fun, purpose, things like that. And you have examples of, like, you know, what used to be encyclopedia now is Wikipedia, right? Microsoft Windows, you have Linux, which is completely volunteer run, right? Completely on intrinsic motivations. You have Couchsurfing and Airbnb, again, commercial and volunteer run. And these are all great examples. But what you don't have are things on the far end of the spectrum, pure labor of love. And the mistake we make is that when we're looking at things on that end of the spectrum, we use metrics from this side. And we say, this is how we measure here. And the problem with that is that we cheapen it, because we actually don't give it the chance to bloom in a far greater. They're like, oh great, service is doing nice, cute stuff, you know, sweet. You get a nice, you know, you share a nice blog post and all, and they don't understand that that inner transformation is something that's just going to keep on going and going and going and going. 15 years later, you know, it's going to have a very different context. So what we are creating is a whole ecosystem on that end of the spectrum. This does not exist in the world today. A young person, when they say when you grow up with the labor of love project, you ultimately become gobbled up by the market. No, it doesn't have to be like that. And this is what we're trying to do with startup, right? This is, so what ultimately I think what I'll conclude with is this idea that we have to operate with this ecosystem vision. This is in Ubud, Bali, Indonesia. All these CEOs decided to do karmakisha, and they decided to be waiters. Right? Totally transformed, and the ripples of it now have gone out into all their different areas. This is, of course, the Awakened Retreat, connecting heart to heart was so powerful, where we've had so many retreats. This is in Sweden. There was a guy who runs Google Europe, and he says, you know, Google is actually, he was the head of advertising, and he says, well, I'm making it easy for you to advertise your products. And what that's doing is creating all these problems, and then I have Google X, which is helping solve those problems. And I pat those guys on the back and say, this is so innovative. So he went and he talked to all these heads, and he says, look, don't you think this is a problem? On one side, we're encouraging this problem. On the other side, we're trying to solve it. And then we consider ourselves as kings of the world. And he's like, they didn't want to hear it. And so he says, okay, see you later. He says, I want to create, so he starts this conversation. This is in Sweden. He's saying, and he came up and he says, oh, I want to start this project and do this. And I said, no, Alfred, well, we need you in the voluntary sector. Just labor of love. Just go out, start conversations, create ripples, do this. He says, made sense to him. He's committed to that. So such people all over the place are saying yes, because they understand. Everyone knows that this side of the spectrum of intrinsic motivations is dead, is dying. We cannot let it die. Without that, humanity cannot survive. This is in London, so many amazing stories. This is in North Dakota, in the US. They have like Fargo is, you know, it's North Dakota is a very right-wing place, politically very polarizing. And they're resonating with this idea. This is in Japan, you know. This is Madhu showed this. Masami, who was the founder of this massive institution in Japan. Yuka was here. Most of us know her. When Viral and I and Pavi and Guri were at breakfast, as we were leaving, she says, just knowing you guys exist, I can die peacefully. Why would she say that? Because she knows this is rooted in nature's design principles. That we're, she thinks of it as we are a young generation, and I'm no longer young, but that idea that this is eternal, and this is strong, this is powerful, and we have the help of such people. And the world is hungry for that, from all my experiences. So, smile back. Yeah, I think that's it. So yeah, maybe this one last thing of like connecting branch tips to the roots. We've talked about that. This is what we open with. is this idea that if it's stuff that's made on the top, it's just not going to have the depth. You can do it endlessly. It's going to keep on changing its form. And that suffering is just not going to end. So how do we connect? And I think a lot of this is in our eyes. Like we have to cultivate the eyes and the insight and the heart to see that. And so all this work becomes an instrument to do that work, which all the service work becomes an instrument for that insight that all these branch tips are connected to a vast root. Root, not just root, but a root system, a network of root systems, where you walk into a room full of 50 and you can see that. If you're looking at 50 bodies in a room, when you're in a room full of 50, your mind, you may think, your head may say, yeah, Gandhi 3.0, I get it, but unless you see 100 million trillion, we have work to do. And even when you see 100 million trillion, then you say, how can I skillfully use these to serve? So I started a little with heart, and then I've just kind of left you with head stuff, which I don't, it's not as touchy-feely, but I feel like all of you are doing such important work in your spaces, as we've heard. And I say spaces loosely because ultimately, even in a space of one, if you're sitting on a cushion somewhere, you're doing that same work. So how big and small our spaces go is a function of beyond our hands. That's not for us to do, but we are all holding this space. If we see 100 million trillion in a room of 50, we're starting to get it in that direction. And so if we are gifted with, if that is our inheritance, if our heart sings yes to that tune, then we have to see what is our responsibility in responding to that responsibility. How do we respond? How do we hold ourselves? Who do we have to be so we can be good trustees of that inheritance?